those trees on fire. A number of people had no choice but to take refuge on their roof as a wall of water tore through small towns like Grantham and Withcott at the bottom of the Toowoomba Range. At least one house in Howard Street, Grantham, was smashed off its stumps and carried away by the raging Lockyer Creek. The mayor described the scene as chaotic.
Oh, look, we've got absolute devastation, huge amounts of flooding. There will be a lot of people evacuated. It's early days yet, and we're yet to sort of get that all in place.
Police have warned everyone who lives in towns along the Lockyer Creek downstream from Gatton to leave their home.
Very scary. I've never seen anything like it. It came out of the forest at 100 miles an hour and it just took everything in its path.
We are in almost uncharted territory.
With the unprecedented series of natural disasters rocking the nation, Australians are awakening to the period of consequence we live in. While Australia has had a history of natural disasters, the crises in the last 10 years are unmatched. Queensland floods, 34. Black Saturday fires, 200. Cyclone Justin, 7. Southeastern heatwave, 374. And internationally the picture's even worse. 56,000, a couple of degrees rise in Russia. 138,000, Cyclone Nargis. This sudden increase in intensity and number of these disasters all points to one thing. The climate is changing, and it's down to us. We may not all agree on the extent of the impact that climate change may have. However, the risk of inaction is too great to be flirted with. The issue has been hotly debated throughout the parliaments of the country, but still no concrete action has been taken, despite the overwhelming consensus of the scientific and general community. All over the earth, thousands of land and ocean temperature measurements are recorded daily. These include measurements from weather stations, climate reference stations, ships, buoys, and autonomous hot air balloons. All this data can be correlated, and despite individual discrepancies, when viewed on the broader scale, the message is clear. Temperatures are rising, and the consequences of this for Australia are catastrophic.
And the things we can talk about here, it might be good to talk about some of the iconic ecosystems. We might start with the Great Barrier Reef. And there we see a sort of a double whammy of climate-related effects, or carbon-related effects, I should say. One is increasing sea temperature, and we've got very good records from the Bureau of Meteorology about how sea temperature has gone up over the past century. And corals are sensitive to increases in temperature. If temperature rises too high and stays there for a long period of time, they bleach. They spit out their symbiotic organisms, turn white, and so on. Those symbiotic organisms are important for them to bring in nutrients and so on. The other thing that's affecting it is the increasing acidity of the ocean, and that happens when carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater. It forms an acid called carbonic acid, and that makes it more difficult for corals to form their calcium carbonate shells. So those two things act together to put pressure on reefs. So if we don't get CO2 emissions under control later this century, then there's a high risk that much of our Great Barrier Reef will be converted to different types of ecosystems.
This rise in temperatures can be attributed to the greenhouse effect.
The atmosphere acts as a sort of buffer to the world, and in that carbon dioxide acts as a filter, mainly trapping solar radiation that bounces off the Earth back into the atmosphere, and then maintaining the Earth at a fairly stable temperature. This is affected by the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So as we emit more CO2 from burning fossil fuels, the amount of radiation that is trapped in the Earth increases. Now, you may think that doesn't have a big effect, but what we've seen over the last few decades, that the Earth has increased its temperature by 0.7 of a degree. That doesn't sound a lot in itself, but if you look at that as the average, in some places it's much higher. But we only need a couple of degrees to see significant change in terms of melting of polar ice caps, and that's what the last 600,000 years of being able to track that through looking at ice caps has told us.
It's very important that we understand. Sir Nicholas Stern, one of the world's great economists, did an assessment for the British government that if we don't act on climate change by a 2% contribution from gross global wealth now, which would fix it, our grandchildren will be hit with a 60 to 20% reduction in their global wealth. So the earlier you tackle it, the cheaper it is. Maggie Thatcher said that 20 years ago, but we're still not tackling it.